Danny Monnot joins me this week to discuss American Pale Ale and the new Pinter brewing system. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 311. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 311, and it's early October 2024. Danny Monnot joins me this week to discuss American Pale Ale and the new Pinter brewing system. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They've recently launched an all-new experience called Craft Spirits and Distilling. If you make or love spirits, check out spiritsanddistilling.com for recipes, how-to videos, their Spirits and Distilling podcast, and much more. Again, the new site is spiritsanddistilling.com. And BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click on that like and subscribe button on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're listening on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome Danny Monnot. Danny got started in craft brewing in 2013 and was head brewer at Platform Beer Company in Cleveland. The company was acquired by Anheuser-Busch, and I'll let him tell you the rest of the story. Danny is currently the operations manager at Pinter, focused on a single-vessel brew system to make homebrewing accessible for beginners. Danny, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brad. I'm incredibly excited to be here. And for me to be back a part as both the brewing community and home brewing community. Thanks so much again for having me.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Well, Danny, since you're on here for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about your background, as well as I think you had kind of an interesting story about being acquired by Anheuser-Busch and then eventually, I think, shuttered, right?
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, a little bit about myself. So, just like most brewers, right? I got my start in homebrewing back in about 2011, and just fell in love with it. Between the science, the creative outlet, and just being able to make something with your hands. Right. So from there, I was just able to get my foot in the door at a local brew pub in Chicago back in 2013, and I was fortunate enough to kind of just grow with the industry from there, where eventually I landed at Platform in Cleveland, right around 2017. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a little bit about Platform. So, and that interesting story that you're alluding to. So Platform was acquired in 2019 by Anheuser-Busch, which, give a little background, is kind of on the tail end of what a lot of people call the kind of that mad dash of acquisitions in the 2010s by those big brewers, right?
Yeah, so, maybe can you explain that a little bit? There was a period of time where big breweries were buying up craft breweries at a pretty rapid rate, right?
Yeah, so Anheuser-Busch, their first acquisition was Goose Island, and I think that was about 2011. When we were acquired in 2019, we were, I think by all accounts, about the 12th or 13th brewery or brand that they acquired at that time. So almost at a clip of like one or two a year. Mm-hmm. And 2010s were really a period of just phenomenal growth, for craft breweries, 10% plus growth every year with just, just growing into the market share. Double-digit
growth throughout that period. Finally starting to slow down now, though, right?
Yeah. So, I think right before COVID, or right after, maybe because of COVID, all those things, growth for the craft brewing industry by volume and by sales started flatlining. There's a couple years where single-digit growth, and then eventually you see some breweries losing shares and losing sales, and it seems to have plateaued now for the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And kind of in that time, right, right after COVID, we were obviously very, very fortunate to be a part of Anheuser-Busch. And quite frankly, I have nothing but good things to say about my time with Anheuser-Busch. from a pure brewing perspective, right? Not the business side of it. Economics is a different story, of course. But I was so fortunate enough to be a part of what they called the Brewers Collective, which is essentially at the time, what was their collective of craft breweries from Goose Island, Elysian, 10 Barrel, Wicked Weed, right? All of these breweries. And all of them had just phenomenal people who really just, at the end of the day, cared about making great beer and cared about sharing their knowledge and their love of it. So it was very, such an amazing time for me and our staff to be able to have all those resources, right? Economically, obviously, being able to, having the buying power that Anheuser-Busch has when it comes to raw materials, with malt, hop contracts, of course they had such a large, you almost want to call caravan of people that go out to hop selection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they certainly get to select their own hops.
Yes, yeah. And of course, just having that wealth of knowledge from their own brewing history of process expertise and again the personnel that they have at essentially our disposal, just to empower us as breweries, to make the best beer that we can. And again, such an amazing time, right around, I would say 2021, 2022, when you start seeing some of these headwinds from the industry, right? You have consumer tastes are changing. You have hard seltzers coming out, RTDs. Those are, ready to drink cocktails, essentially.
Yeah, the vodka drinks, right?
Yeah, all of those things start picking apart at, breweries' growth and breweries' volume. Of course, you have just breweries themselves, right? You have people, breweries opening left and right. There's probably 9,000 today or something like that.
It was, I think it peaked around 9,400. I haven't seen the numbers for this year yet, but somewhere around there.
But yeah, all of that increased competition. You see people, either trending towards those national brands, right? Like New Belgium, Bell's, Sierra Nevada, all such amazing beers. Or they're trending towards, right, just their local brew pub that they can buy fresh as you can get 6-pack right down the road. So what really happened is those middle breweries, right, those regional or small regional breweries really started to get squeezed on the shelves and even in the tap rooms. And all those headwinds kind of accumulated into kind of what I'll call a changing strategy shift.
Yeah.
At Anheuser-Busch, right? The 2010s were all about just top line growth. There's plenty of craft shares to go around for everyone. We just wanted to grow, and it was really easy at that time. Again, with all those headwinds, as long as with the kind of macroeconomics of the U.S. economy, right, and the early 2020s, rising inflation and all of that, there was an apparent shift in strategy at AB on less of top line growth and more on profitability and scale. Right. So kind of with that change in strategy came obviously a very drastic change in what their portfolio of breweries was. And we were essentially the first domino to fall.
Wow. And of course, it wasn't just Anheuser-Busch. I mean, all of the big breweries went through a lot of the big brewers went through a similar thing. They acquired craft breweries in the 2010s, and now we're seeing many of them, divesting themselves of those holdings.
Yeah, especially in the last, again, 2 years, we've seen a ton. So, we were shuttered completely as a brand. Our brewery, our 3 tap rooms were all completely shuttered. In February of 2023.
Wow.
Yeah. So obviously a very sad time, very hard time, for myself and again, all of our staff. But we have some amazing people that I worked with, and everyone was able to land on their feet. But yeah, after that, you also then saw AB's strategy of divesting. And again, you've seen that with Miller Coors as well in the last couple of years, where AB, divested probably another half a dozen beer brands
Mm-hmm.
to Tilray, right? So let me see, Blue Point, I believe 10 Barrel, and a handful of others were divested to Tilray, who is this Canadian cannabis company, is essentially
Okay.
what they were. Yeah. Who owned, I think they themselves, they owned one or two craft breweries, and I don't remember who. But they've essentially, it's what you would call is they're able to buy low, right? So they
Yeah,
bought all
yeah.
these
So
breweries.
as things tightened, a lot of the big breweries just started to divest of their smaller holdings, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you've seen Miller Coors do the same to actually divesting again their 4 or 5 craft brands, again to Tilray.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly enough, this company, again this Canadian cannabis company, um, all of a sudden has become what is like the third or fourth largest independent craft brewery, by the terms of the Brewers Association, and it just purely by acquisitions.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, today you want to talk a little bit about pale ales, and I understand while you were working, you received a GABF Silver for your pale ale, New Cleveland. That was while you were at Platform, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So, New Cleveland, man, it was the first beer that Platform ever brewed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, Sean was the brewer at the time. He's the one that came up with the recipe. He actually owns his own brewery now on the east side of Cleveland. Um, Fantastic individual, and he makes some amazing beers. But yeah, New Cleveland won silver in 2022 for International Pale Ale.
Mm-hmm.
And winning that for us at the time and with our staff was just just a fantastic reinforcement to us that we were doing the right things, right? That we were making great quality production level beer.
Mm-hmm. So for years, American Pale Ale, of course, was perhaps the first big breakout beer in craft brewing. Can you tell us about a little bit about American Pale Ale? What makes it different from, say, English Pale Ale? And then, of course, the category where you were working in was International Pale Ale.
Yeah, so that first word is really all the difference. American pale ales are purely American in the sense of their hops, right? We are so fortunate here in the U.S. to have such a wealth of hops in the Pacific Northwest, and even now in some Midwest states like Michigan and upstate New York that grow such fantastic, vibrant, um, fruit heavy hops. You really don't see that a lot in the rest of the world. American pale ales are primarily categorized by their use of American hops, and that emphasis on that hop profile. It's pretty much the primary attribute of any pale ale, whether that's an American hop or any British hop that you might have, or German hop for any of those other types of styles.
Now, don't American Pale Ales also use usually a cleaner finish on the yeast, I believe, right?
Yeah. So American pale ales again, use what now we call right American yeast or Chico
California.
yeast. Yeah, Chico, California, any of those types where it's again it lets those hops shine. English varietal pale ales, will of course use very traditional English yeast, which typically throws out a lot more esters and phenols for you. Which interestingly enough now is what a lot of breweries use anyway for their hazies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, American pale ales are strictly kind of there to help make that. It's the perfect platform, in my opinion, for hops to shine, even more than IPAs. So.
And they were a predecessor to IPA, so I would argue that the American Pale Ale was kind of a lead into the whole IPA revolution, right?
Yeah, and that's and it's really such an interesting story about kind of what I understand, at least the originations of the American Pale Ale, right? So, like you said, it was essentially the first craft beer style, if you want to call it that. in the U.S. And, we can thank some of the earliest craft breweries, at least modern craft breweries, including New Albion Brewing, right, which opened in 1976, and then Sierra Nevada,
Nevada.
Yeah, opened in 1979. And at my time at Platform, actually, I was very fortunate to be a part of that New Albion Brewing story. So I was able to work with Jack McAuliffe, right, the founder and brewer of New Albion Brewing.
Wow.
And his partner to be able to kind of recreate their pale ale and a couple of their other beers. But they were able to share some really interesting stories that brewers now honestly, we just can't relate.
Can you share a quick one, maybe?
Yeah, of course. Right. So, my interpretation of like American Pale Ale and the originations is a lot of it obviously is just filling that market gap at the time, right? You could get macro lagers and not much else, right? Or you'd have to get imported beers. So, of course, there's people out there who wanted, full flavored ales. But, the other reason it kind of came to be is just purely economics and raw material availability. So Jack and his partner were telling me the stories of, how they got their malt, right? Their 2-row pale ale malt, whatever it was at the time. You didn't have 50-pound bags of base malt. You didn't have super sacks. You couldn't even get, what a lot of brewers now get, like truckloads that fills a silo.
Yeah.
Because there was no one else that needed those sizes. So, this small brewery that started up, New Albion, they had to get their base malt by the rail car.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, which is just, again, we can't relate, right? As brewers today, you can get, malt from all over the world in a matter of days from any of these warehouses across the US. And same thing with hops, right? For them back in, 76, 77, the hops that were being grown were just high alpha hops, right? That those macro brewers needed for their lagers, and there wasn't much else. So, when they go to the hop growers and we're looking for hops to use, there really wasn't anything available because it was already all contracted out. So the only thing that really wasn't at the time was Cascade. Again, that's such an established hop that we go for now, but at the time, it was the only thing available to them, and it was such a newer hop that nobody else
was using it.
Dare to use it because it was so, what we would call, maybe they would call probably wild in its flavors, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So, again, the pale ale, at least in its infancy, was purely out of almost economics.
That's pretty cool.
Which is pretty amazing.
Now, your beer, it was an APA. I'm sorry, your APA was a pale pilsner. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Which is a hybrid, and it's an international beer. What does that mean, though? What is a pale pilsner? What is an international pale ale?
Yeah. So, why we called it, we would call it New Cleveland Pilsner, or Pale Pilsner Hybrid. And kind of what that was back in 2013 for us, 2014 when Platform first started, was, it was a strategic way to, let's say, reach across the aisle to, some of these macro drinkers, to give them a gateway beer, to really introduce them to what craft beer can taste like, but not scare them away so much as like, whoa, I don't recognize this flavor. So that's why we termed it a pale ale pilsner.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of that mesh of those two styles. The beer itself, New Cleveland, why, and the recipe and the process behind it, kind of, again, it takes bits and pieces of both of those styles to make this end product that is just balanced, but hop forward with enough body, to let the beer stand on its own.
Now, are you using a Pilsner base, for example?
Yeah. So the majority of its life, New Cleveland had a Pilsner base. We used all German malts at the time, again, in that ethos of Pilsner beers. It was about 94 to 95% Pilsner malt. Another 2 to 3% was Vienna. and another 2 to 3% was dark Munich. And depending on the brew house that we were using at the time, whether it was at our pub or one or two production brew houses, we would use acidulated or dextrin malt as well. Um, so yeah, the malt side of it was purely, German Pilsner style malts, but again with just a little bit of body to it, in that vein of pale ales.
Yeah, what are some of the benefits of using a kiln malt like Vienna or Munich, whereas, you might use a crystal or caramel malt on an English pale ale?
Yeah, so I think, for us, especially over the years, what I would say is probably the mid 2010s and late 2010s. And, I think you had John Palmer on a couple episodes ago talking about it as well, where, brewers have learned a lot about caramel malts and how they stand up in package.
Sure.
It certainly lends itself a little bit more to oxidation and staling, and the byproducts of its oxidation are certainly more pronounced in flavor than maybe those of those lightly kilned malts. And you would see brewers and myself just tend away from caramel malts, especially when you start using all of these amazing hop varieties, that are coming out of the Pacific Northwest, Citra, Mosaic, Amarillos, and, Centennial even. Caramel malts are almost too pronounced in their flavors, right? They lend almost too much in the aroma, and they just get in the way, right, of that hop profile that brewers just fall in love with.
Yeah, I always associate the kiln malts with a much cleaner finish and flavor. Whereas the caramel crystals, they do better in, say, an English style beer where you've got a whole variety of flavors really kind of playing against each other. The fruits, the esters, everything else working together, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. American pale ales replace English hops with U.S. variants, which substantially changes the bitterness profile. We talked quite a bit about how the American hops play a role, but you did take a little different route with this particular beer. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, again, New Cleveland, again, kind of in that nod to the Pilsner style. We use SOTs. We use European SOTs for it. But again, with the twist here that we really used it at a more of an American hopping rate, right? Americans, we like them bitter and we like it pronounced. So we use that hopping rate at about 1 pound per barrel. Yeah, all the way through the boil, right? I mean, there's still no dry hop and all that, but it's in total about 1 pound per barrel on the hot side between the kettle and the whirlpool.
Well, Saaz, of course, is associated most strongly with Czech lagers, right? And various German styles, but it does have its own spiciness to it. It does have a little bit of punch to it.
Yes, yeah, and that's the thing that I think Stan was again talking about it on again an earlier episode. Is there's some hops out there that brewers just I've almost become forgotten. In their pungency or even in their attributes, because they were only solely used as a hot side hops or even just bittering hops, right? Early in the boil, where nowadays, you can really almost rediscover some hops just by throwing them in as a dry hop or even throwing them in, late in the kettle or in the whirlpool. So it's really fantastic.
But you said for the Saaz, you were using them primarily for boiling, I guess, right?
Yeah, so we use bittering hops, not SOTs, higher alpha, for at the 90-minute and 60-minute editions, and the SOTs are almost primarily all 30-minute, 10-minute, and flame out for us.
Interesting. So you were doing whirlpool hopping. Did you do any dry hopping at all on this particular beer?
No, no. Again, we did a pretty heavy load of hops in the boil, at least for kind of this hybrid beer, right? Where we let the SOTs in the boil kind of stand on its own.
Yeah, so I mean, you're doing a long extended whirlpool, it sounds like, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, we're all kind of familiar with bittering hops and IBUs. You said separately that you'd done some work on sensory bitterness and how it affects dry hopping. Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yeah, of course. So, and even for me, a lot of this is, what I would call recent technical learnings, which is, again, what I love about the brewing industry is there's such a wealth of information out there that it'll take you decades just to know, I won't say everything, just to know some of the stuff. Um, but what I'll kind of baseline here is like it's important to remember IBUs are not solely a measurement of iso alpha acids, right? So what that means is, 1 ppm of iso alpha is not 1 IBU, right? 1 ppm of iso is really about 0.6 or 0.8 IBUs. Why it's always kind of correlated like that, is because obviously, you're throwing in T90, T45, whole cone hops in your boil, and you're getting some of those other bittering compounds from hops and obviously from the malt. It just kind of has always worked out to 1 ppm or 1 isomerization of alpha acids is about 1 IBU. But it really measures the entire kind of range in that wavelength. I think it's 275 to capture all of the bittering compounds from hops and malts.
Yeah, I should mention for those that don't know, IBUs, if you measure them, they measure them with light, right? They shine a light through a sample of beer, and that's how you can measure it. Is that correct? I think, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the technical way is you take a spectrophotometer. And you measure it, I think, at 275 is the way.
Right, but there's a whole bunch of other interesting things. I've actually been having this discussion ongoing for several years now with people about IBUs, because IBUs are usually measured into the into the fermenter typically, and of course that number changes dramatically when you start fermenting the beer and packaging it and aging it and all kinds of things. So it's not even a fixed number. It's actually a number that kind of changes over time as the beer matures and changes. So.
Correct. Yeah, and kind of like what you said, especially with dry hopping. So dry hopping is a huge proponent of change when it comes to bitterness. Measured and from a sensory perspective, right?
Right, and dry hopping doesn't add much in terms of isomerized alpha acid. In fact, almost none. But it adds other bittering compounds or compounds that we perceive as bitter, right?
Correct. Yeah, and so kind of what those two main bittering compounds are actually, oxidized byproducts of alpha acids and beta acids, right? So alpha acids, which aren't soluble in water, they can oxidize. I believe they're called these words are always so hard to say, but it's humulilones. So that's the oxidized version of alpha acids, right? And in turn, they are water soluble. So when you throw them in your beer, they will pick up in beer. And they're about 60% as bitter as iso acids or iso alpha acids. Sorry, and then beta acids. Yeah, and then beta acids also oxidize, and those oxidize to humulilones. It's always so hard to say. And again, beta acids aren't water soluble, but their oxidized version are water soluble, and those are actually about twice as bitter as isomerized alpha acids.
But they're not as big a factor in the actual finished beer, though, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the absolute amounts when it comes to the oxidized alpha acids or the oxidized beta acids are relatively small, at least compared to your iso alpha acids. But it's something to always keep in mind, especially with dry hop beers. Mm-hmm. And the other thing to keep in mind with sensory bitterness is that the hop matter from T90 pellets, whole cones, et cetera, will actually remove some of your IBUs or your iso alpha acids. There's been some studies actually that show for high IBU beers, let's say something that's about 50 IBUs, if you dry hop it at 2 pounds per barrel, which again I'm not sure what that correlates to in home brewing.
Pretty high, yeah.
Yeah, that's like an IPA dry hop for us. That's actually going to reduce your measured IBUs by about 30%.
Wow.
Yeah. But of course, that's counteracted to some extent, right, with that with those water soluble oxidized acids.
Yeah, the other bittering compounds you're adding, basically. So interesting. Well, any other thoughts on that particular topic? I thought we'd move on.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing there is, of course, pH. pH matters to everything in brewing, and sensory bitterness is just like everything else. It's important to remember when you dry hop a beer, typically you're going to raise the pH. Again, 1 pound per barrel typically raises it by 0.1, your pH, and that also has a large effect on your sensory bitterness.
Yeah, I know we've had a couple brewers on who are now more focused on adjusting not only the pre-fermentation pH, well, I'm sorry, I should say not only mash pH, but they're worried about pre-fermentation pH and then post-fermentation pH and final pH of the finished beer. And there's quite a few of them that adjust that now.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we did as well at Platform for all of our IPAs. We had a spec for pre-fermentation pH and post-fermentation pH.
Yeah. Okay. Any tips on someone looking to make a great American Pale Ale or international Pale Ale?
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to experiment, and go off the beaten path, much like Platform did. That's and you remember that's kind of how craft beer got started, is just people doing their own things. Especially in today's market and today's technologies and raw materials out there, you can make some pretty great American stylized IPAs very non-traditionally, right? There's so many different types of hop products, yeast strains out there that weren't available even 5 years ago. Whether it's the Kvike strains that have been around now for 7 or 8 years, or even, there's of course hybrid lager strains. We've had success at Pinter with Nova that can really make some great tasting beers without kind of the huge challenge of temperature control. The other thing is really just trust your palate, and focus on developing that palate, especially when it comes to bitterness. As we kind of just talked about, it's so incredibly hard to zero in on an IBUs, especially for your finished product, when there's so many factors out there that can change it throughout the beer's life cycle. So at the end of the day, just trust your palate to dial that in. Know what works for you and know what doesn't work for you.
Well, thanks, Danny. I wanted to dive into the second topic you wanted to discuss today, which is, of course, your new job. You're now the operations director at Pinter, or Pinter, Pinter.com. Which is a small brewing system designed for beginning homebrewers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Pinter, we've been around now for about 4 or 5 years, mostly in the UK. We just launched in the US just about a year ago. But what it is so it's an all-in-one homebrewing vessel. And what that means for us is you buy this one piece of equipment from us, and it's the only thing that you need to brew, ferment, condition, carbonate, and dispense your beer. The only other thing that you need is a fridge. So in that, there's no transferring of the beer, right? So you don't have to worry about oxidation. You don't have to worry about microbial infections from the transfer or anything like that. So it's such and I'm going to say this word a lot, it's such an elegant design, the vessel and the product itself. It's really, really amazing. Each vessel itself holds about 18 to 20 12-ounce cans, right? So each time you brew with it, you get almost a case of beer.
So that's about 2.5 to 3 gallons, something like that, roughly?
Yeah, I think it's just about 2 gallons, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, and to be able to do all of that in one vessel, really, and make great beer that you're proud of. Again, it has taken the team years to develop. We're on our third iteration of the vessel itself, right? We have a team of engineers that are solely focused on the design of the vessel and, how all of its small details affect the brewing, the fermenting. We have a function to be able to remove, your trub, right? Your yeast sediment off of the beer before you condition it. To dry, we have the capability to be able to dry hop in it, with our special vial, and of course dispense straight from it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I got to mention our engineering team actually won a Red Dot Award this year for the design of the Pinter vessel, which is incredibly amazing for them.
That's amazing. So, so the system looks like a plastic keg, and I think you had one in the background there. Maybe you can show us in a minute. But, anyways, it's a no boil system, right? So you don't need to boil ingredients; you just dump them in, I believe, right?
Yep.
And then mix them with water, and then I assume you ferment in that same vessel, and then it's self-carbonating, I believe, and you just serve right out of that. Can you walk us through the entire process, perhaps?
Of course, yeah. So, I mean, you can see the vessel here on my screen. Yeah, it's about, what we typically say is maybe the case of a beer, right? A cube of beer. That's about how much space you need in your fridge to fit this. So you buy one of our kits. It comes with a QR code. You scan the QR code, download our app, and then, there are step-by-step instructions with animations to lead you through the brewing process. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to fill this with water. It just unscrews right here, fill with water, and then we have a one-step sanitizer that we use for everything right before you brew. Slosh it around, make sure all the parts are wetted, sanitize. Run it through your faucet to make sure that's sanitized as well. Dump that all out, fill it with water. Our kits come with a syrup-based extract. You dump that in. And there's obviously more than just the liquid malt extract in there.
So are you separately adding the yeast, I would assume, and probably, I don't know, do you have a separate isomerized hop extract you're adding or something like that?
Sort of. So that syrup, again, that syrup-based kit, it comes with more than just liquid malt extract. So in that mixture is your isomerized hop extract. Sure. Of course, there's other advanced hop products that we're using in our kits as well. Especially for IPAs and things of that nature. So you dump in that syrup, you give it a good mix, and then you just add in your yeast. Each kit comes with a small sachet of yeast. Mm-hmm. Again, that we have done our due diligence to make sure works in our environment. Like you said, what's unique about the Pinter is not just its shape. But yeah, to be able to be self-carbonated, right? It ferments under pressure, pretty significant pressure too. Certainly more than 20 psi is what I'll say. Sure. So we've done our due diligence to make sure that we find yeasts, that work in that environment. The last thing you do before you kind of set it and forget it is they all come with this brewing dock. So this brewing dock is what you put on. To make sure that at the end of fermentation, when all the yeast is dropping out, you can remove that yeast after it's all done.
So that lets the sediment drop out and so on?
Yeah, and because you don't, as we know, a lot of us know anyway, you don't want to condition on the yeast, right? That yeast will eventually die, italicize, raise your pH, give a lot of off flavors. So again, the team, a lot of thought, a lot of design. Once you're all done, because it ferments just like this, standing up. Mm-hmm. So, and again, our app tells you how long you need to ferment for each specific style. Let's say it's 7, 8, 9, 10 days. Yeah. Once it's all done, all you need to do is just twist it and then pull it right off. Just like that. And this little vessel here will just have all of your yeast sediment, your trub, and hop sediment. So then that way, it's time to put this in the fridge and condition. Mm-hmm. And then it looks like
it's got the tap right on the front there, right?
Yeah. So then you just need to wait, another 4 to 5 days is what we say at minimum. Obviously, the longer you wait, the cleaner the beer. And again, that's all described in our app. And that's it. Then you just need to start pouring. The beer here, again, there's no transferring, no oxygen ingress. So really, this beer will keep as long as it's cold.
That's great. Very cool. Yeah, I think you probably saw the episode we had Chris Graham on a couple weeks ago for More Beer. And they've been working on no-boil kits, and he was talking about some of the challenges of actually creating a no-boil kit and trying to get the proper malt balance, hop balance, all those other things. Sounds like you have a similar concept here, but of course you have the kit combined with the equipment setup, which is kind of nice. Um, and then you sell more kits, I assume, right?
Yeah, yeah. So again, we just like we have a whole team of engineers, fussing over the design and how to make it better. We have a product development team as well that I work with to develop new styles, new products, to work within our system. Um, Again, what I've mentioned before is there's so many amazing new hop products out there, and even yeasts out there that weren't available 10 years ago, that really make this type of homebrewing platform, in my opinion at least, successful. Right? Your Kvike strains, your hybrid lager strains, your advanced hop products, um, things that really lend themselves to, what's the word, kind of fuss-free homebrewing, right? Um,
Well, you probably saw many years ago. There was I think a Mr. Beer kit was popular in
yeah,
many of the big department stores and so on. But since then we've been kind of looking for a way to get more people into homebrewing. I think you probably know homebrewing's been on a little bit of a decline last 10 years as well.
yeah.
And we're looking for ways to make homebrewing easier. I assume that's a goal you have as well with Pinter.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, the process that I described takes all of about 20 minutes. To get it all in, mix it all up. You set it on your counter anywhere that's room. Is about room temperature is all we really suggest. And that's it. And about 2 weeks later, you have beer on tap. But yeah, of course, our goal is to get more people involved in homebrewing. Just like myself, when I was able to just start homebrewing, it's such an amazing experience where you get this creative outlet, you get this opportunity to learn something new. We want to be able to bring that to more people. The other goal that we have with it as well, especially in a post-COVID world, is really remembering that beer is a social and a community product, right? And we have such a large emphasis on you making this product and sharing it with your friends, having parties at your house, or just being social with it, because at the end of the day, that's what beer is. For the last couple hundred years, has been kind of is one of those fulcrum products for the community, whether it's at your local pub, at your local microbrewery. It's such an integral aspect to a lot of communities, and we want to be able to have people bring that home with them.
Now, I know you just only recently introduced this into the U.S. Markets, and I think it's got a pretty attractive price point, if I recall. I don't remember. Can you tell us roughly what a kit costs?
Yeah, so the vessel itself right now is retailing for either $100 or $150.
Okay.
And so that, again, that you get the vessel there, and this, again, is the only thing that you need to start brewing. The kits themselves, again, which make about 12-ounce beers, retail anywhere between $28 to $32.
So, I mean, that's fairly reasonable for somebody, looking for a gift for, I don't know, Father's Day, birthday, Christmas, that kind of a thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, I had a brother, I think his wife or girlfriend at the time bought him a Mr. Beer kit, whatever, 10 years ago. And I think he used it once. Right.
Yeah.
But, with this, again, there's been a lot of thought, it's such an approachable design that we've seen a lot of success from our U.S. customers.
Yeah, it looks pretty clever. What has the reaction been for people, making beer, the quality of the beer, tasting the beer, and so on?
People love it. We have, of course, there's a Facebook group that people share tips and tricks, or they ask us questions. We see a lot of people buying and rebuying a lot of our kits. The stout that we have, Dark Matter, oddly enough, in September and August has been, one of the best received products that we have. We have a couple IPAs as well. Actually today,
I was going to ask what styles you have. You mentioned a stout, for example.
Yeah, we've got a stout, we've got a lager, Of course, we have a handful of British styles, right? Ancestors Pale, Bitter. There's 2 different ciders. We have a clear cider and a hazy cider even for non-beer drinkers. 2 or 3 different types of IPAs, a Mexican lager. And yeah, like I said, we have a product development team that I work with, where our goal is 1 or 2 new products a month. And again, today we're excited to announce 2 new products that are releasing today to the U.S. consumer base.
Sure.
A hazy IPA with Eldorado, Mosaic, and Citra, I believe, and it's actually a collaboration with Appalachian Mountain Brewing Company out in North Carolina.
Oh, nice.
Again, it all goes back to that social aspect and that celebrating aspect that we love about beer, that we just want to kind of continue to grow with the brewing community. The other one that we're releasing today is just a standard wheat ale in collaboration with Sycamore Brewing, again out of North Carolina.
Well, Danny, is there anything else you want to tell us about Pinter?
There is so much more I do want to tell you guys. It's just not the right time. We have a lot of exciting developments in the works, a lot of projects that we've been working on tirelessly over the last year. Look for some big announcements from us in November, I believe is one of them. And then especially in 2025,
Awesome.
we have some pretty incredible projects coming up.
And I want to mention your website one more time, if you would.
Yeah. So, here in the U.S., you can find us on Pinter.com. That's just Pinter, Pinter.com.
Awesome. Well, Danny, appreciate you coming on the show to talk about pale ales as well as your new project, Pinter. Can you give us your closing thoughts on both?
Of course. Yeah. Again, Brad, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of the brewing community and the home brewing community again. It's just great to be a part of all that passion that exudes this industry. As far as pale ales go, especially with the king that is IPAs, pale ales, in my opinion, are such an underappreciated and almost underrated style nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
That I just want to encourage everyone to take a stab at brewing them again. And if it's something that maybe they haven't brewed in months or years, to take a set of fresh eyes to it, and try some of those new and exciting products out there, whether it's a different yeast, different hop products, or even, of course, there's the hops race where there's always new hops coming out. And yeah, as far as Pinter goes, thanks again for letting me chat about it. It's really an elegant piece of equipment. Again, I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it, especially coming, from my background being a commercial brewer. I usually thumb up at put my nose up to a lot of home brewing kits and stuff like that. But I really am bought into this. Again, the thought and detail that has got into it is pretty much a game changer in my opinion.
Awesome. Well, Danny, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you being here today.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks again, Brad, for having me.
My guest today is Danny Monnot. He's a former head brewer at Platform Beer Company and now operations manager at Pinter. Thank you again, Danny.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, a big thank you to Danny Monnot for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They recently launched a all-new experience called Craft Spirits and Distilling. If you make or love spirits, check out spiritsanddistilling.com for recipes, how-to videos, their Spirits and Distilling podcast, and much more. Again, their new site is spiritsanddistilling.com. And also BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click on that like and subscribe button at YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're listening on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.